Hi there, it's Shannon, the Integrative Counselor, popping on here to talk about the fact that we don't have to remember our trauma to process it, integrate it, and to recover. So much of traditional healthcare and even therapy, unfortunately, runs off of a misunderstanding of how memory works. So memory works in two types of ways: consciously through explicit memory, meaning knowing lists, remembering maybe your phone number that you grew up with. These are explicit memories, memories of sometimes a memory that comes with maybe a positive experience of like it was a fall day and it comes with a clear story. And a lot of times, what many, even well meaning healthcare practitioners and even therapists believe that trauma comes with a narrative. And there's been so many modalities that have been created off of this misunderstanding. And as someone who works with a lot of trauma and am trained in multiple trauma modalities, that's just not how trauma memories work. So trauma memories work in the other fashion. Obviously, there's elements that you can remember about, and some people do remember about trauma, and I'm not negating that, but I want to add to what else is happening. And what else is happening is the unconscious or implicit memories. Now, implicit memories are emotional memories and somatic body based procedural memories that exist not only at the cellular level, but also at even at the ancestral level that can come through our thoughts, behaviors, patterns, trauma responses, emotions, etc. And and these memories don't come with a story. So these memories don't come with a clear story. They come with habitual, unconscious patterns. And that's why they're called procedural memories. And these can date back within your family history for a while. So research has shown even 5 to 6 generations, and even more. Can date back as to this is how we survive this situation and this is how our nervous system pattern works. We also inherit nervous system patterns, and our nervous system patterns are constantly primed or attuned to our current situation. So even research has shown even in the second and third trimester, the what was going on for you inside the womb and with mom, that can come with memory and patterning. I notice it in all sorts of ways, through nervous system, through thoughts, through affect, through behavior, through patterns, through nervous system responses. And of course, these are diagnosed as many things. And we don't have to remember to heal. Because what do we do, Shannon? Well, how do we heal? We can start with right now, with what's going on right now. And in my work of over 25 years working with people, I've never encountered a situation that doesn't make sense, as far as from a trauma lens, and from like a cultural competency lens. I've never encountered a situation or a diagnosis or a behavior pattern where it doesn't make sense. I've also, worked through, my own complex trauma and have met all of the inner workings of what goes on inside, and so therefore I'm not scared, nor am I going to shame or pathologize any sort of expression of implicit, unconscious, procedural, body based memories, which can come through emotions. A lot of times, what's considered as trauma is only one incident of trauma, and that's still trauma. Absolutely. PTSD is still trauma with like more of a one incident of trauma, and of course that's happening, but there's also developmental trauma and childhood trauma and complex trauma and chronic trauma and ancestral trauma and collective trauma and ecological trauma and all of these things that our body is emerged in a part of that can remember. Even the collective stories kind of can live within. And IFS gives us some clues as far as legacy burdens and those cultural burdens and ancestral burdens. Epigenetics gives us clues as to when someone in your family encounter trauma, that turns on an epigenetic lever, which is expressed as physical and health conditions through your DNA, which is passed down and either already turned on or gets turned on. So epigenetics, kind of the analogy is loads the gun and the environment pulls the trigger with that, and that includes trauma, even of the emotional nature, which is emotional violence as experienced within the body. So we don't have to remember, and through my somatic experiencing training, it is so amazing as to when we get curious about the patterns, because somatic experiencing, we just go with what the body is saying, and the body brings in the mind, it brings in the spirit, can bring in ancestral patterns, and we just get really curious, slow down, and complete out. So what are trauma responses? Trauma responses are incomplete self-protection responses. Self-protection responses are trauma responses. So the self-protection response doesn't get to complete out. And so we slow those whatever's coming up in the body here and now. We slow that down, allowing the body time and space and prompts and the curiosity for those movement patterns to move through. And then that releases the procedural memories and opens up the neural pathways where the trauma is stored. And then sometimes we can sweep back through and come through a healing response, because healing trauma in my practice is also super empowering. It's super empowering. Sometimes it's very mystical and very spiritual. Sometimes it's very ancestral. And then other times it's just super nerdy because I apply both neuroscience and the transpersonal nature, or spirituality, and I include a lot of humor and education when we're healing trauma. And we also, part of the deal with trauma is, if we're going to process trauma, we're going to get access to the wisdom that comes with it. So that's why I'm just a big fan of processing trauma through the body, which links up with the mind. Somatic practices are actually very cognitive too, and so people are often like, "Whoa, your body is just more wise than your mind. Your mind is a collection of parts, and your mind is porous, meaning it can be a collection of whatever is your body has been a part of and participated in, or even in even regions, as far as like regions of America or places that you live in. There's certain types of traumas, thoughts, and behaviors that are customs that are part of that become lodged within your body as part of procedural memories, of course. And so it gets to be very interesting, and we get really curious, and people start healing. And they start healing, meaning they don't become perfect. A lot of people assume healing means perfect, meaning they have more capacity within. They have more ease, they have more curiosity, more compassion. They're more within the rhythm of life. Their nervous system is more adaptable. They are more aware of parts that are they're blended with, meaning hijacked, which are diagnosed as a lot of different things. I don't do that in my practice. I don't do pathologizing, because it's all trauma and imbalances from my training and perspective, and so that's why I work as a coach, because that's where I'm going to meet you at. You certainly can work with a traditional therapist or a traditional healthcare practitioner, but I'm an integrative, somatic, energetic, psychedelic, integration, shamanic practitioner, and disability and neurodivergence and chronic illness expert. And so I'm going to stay in the lane that I'm trained in, no matter what's projected at me. No matter what you want me to be, I'm still gonna, stay in my scope of practice. And get really curious about the nervous system patterns, and get really curious about what's coming up within your body, or what's coming up as blocks and things like that. Somatic experiencing, we're trained in various nervous system patterns, which equal out to various physical and health conditions. And so, why I practice this way, because not only does it speed up the healing process, check, thank you, please, yes, please, but it also addresses both physical and mental health symptoms together, and also the spiritual and energetic imbalances. And that's why I weave some of those shamanic and energetic practices in as well. And I get trained in the latest and greatest innovative integrative practices before the medical model. Traditionally, it takes them 17 years to start to apply some of the things that I'm already knowing about. And so I'm a big fan of all of those alternative and complementary practices Of course, you don't have to be into any of those because, again, as an integrative medicine and somatic trauma practitioner, I'm team human. So team you and whatever works for you because that's informed consent. And that's part of cultural competency is understanding that people come from different places of the world and different beliefs and backgrounds and that's being open as an integrative practitioner is one of my values and one of the things that I embody. So I want to just educate a little bit about that today. Because a lot of times people just think I have to remember it all in order to tell a clear story. No, that's not it. That's not in my work. That's not what we're doing because it isn't often about a clear story. In fact, trauma is lies within the unconscious. And the body has been the most, in the last couple hundred years, one of the most denied assets within the healing process. So has energy, and so has spirituality, and so has holistic earth-based elements, and especially in the last 100 years. And I'm here to integrate all of those aspects of being because whole self healing is a real thing. And I don't, trauma makes you, compartmentalize and cast off parts of yourself already. And why would I ask you to do that as you heal? So you're allowed to be your full self. And if you've had a mystical or if you've had an ET experience and a psychedelic experience, that's welcome too. I'm also diversity of thought is welcome, and all of that's allowed. And I don't think that someone is delusional if they share beliefs that are outside of what consensus agreement. Like you're allowed to share those things. Like that's okay. In fact, that's very interesting. I love to hear about those things. So hopefully this has helped you understand a little bit more about perhaps getting curious about maybe a different type of healing modality or healing through the body. A lot of times what happens if people go full cognitive, and full cognitive is great, and then people just are like, I still am not showing up in the world, quite how I want to. And still there's some symptoms. And we've got to process thoroughly through all of the channels of experience. And that's what somatic experiencing allows for. It's not only the intellectual, but it's the somatic, it's the behavioral, it is the meaning channel, it is even through posture. I notice so much through posture and body-based memories, even how you're walking and sitting and things like that say a whole lot about what your body's been to. Massage therapists, they get that. And so that's a lot of kind of what I'm looking at and getting very curious. The mind is embodied in the body. And so when the body's often in a state of fight or flight or freeze, fawn, then parts are pumping out thoughts, and various thoughts get diagnosed as certain things when they're just aspects and fragmentation within a traumatized nervous system is really smart and diversifies trauma physiology into different parts, and parts show up in different posture and body memory, and in even I can hear it in the voice and facial expression and levels of activation or levels of dissociation, and they're all really super valuable. So how I work is I don't shut any of that down. I actually move towards it. And I get really curious because there is wisdom. So part of the deal with healing trauma in the way through the body or through parts work in the wisdom or through even energy or shamanic practices. And when I say shamanic practices, please don't contact me to be a guide sitter or a psychedelic therapist. There are earth-based shamanic practices that are kind of like guided meditation practices, and that's how I practice. So just a diversion into that's how I practice, because I get there's a lot of misunderstanding. And of course, it's okay because the world is waking up to ancestral healing. So when we work through the trauma physiology, you better believe we're going to gain the wisdom there, because not only do we inherit ancestral trauma in the procedural memories, but we also inherit the ancestral wisdom and the wisdom that comes with trauma in parts when they're in their unburdened state. So you're going to get that too. So the healing with me is super empowering and nerdy and exciting and fun and mystical. You've been through the trauma. Okay, so why would I make healing any other way than to provide the opportunity for all of the healing to occur, not just you creating some narrative story in a type of way that your trauma is not even, that's explicit memory, and that's some of it. But when we process the unconscious and the implicit memories, then the memories or whatever is coming through can consolidate, and neural pathways are laid down on top of the trauma physiology, meaning new ways of being are created. And so, much like EMDR, these methods do the very same thing, somatic experiencing and IFS and other nervous system practices, when we practice in an empowering, ancestral, and very trauma trained way, we can lay on those new neural pathways on top of the trauma memories, and so that becomes a new pattern. And so that becomes a new way of being, and that becomes a new potential, and that becomes a new possibility, and that becomes your future self. And then you're in this process of becoming and being, and it's different. And a lot of times people can be really, really scared because trauma makes things very certain. You even know, even from the most unconscious level, you know what you're going to get if you keep showing up to life in the same way. You know for certain. And there are healing stages. And so there is this middle liminal space when you're not quite where you were and not quite where you're going to be, where there's a lot of unknowns, and you've never been this version, or you've never shown up with this type of way in the world. And so it can come with a lot of that. And so I hope to navigate and demystify the process, and that is just part of the process, especially for those of us with complex trauma where there wasn't like a before where things were like one way. As a lot of times with one instant of trauma, a lot of times people are trying to return to how they were before, yet what something happened and fundamentally changed how they related to themselves in reality. And part of what gets missed so much, not only trauma processing gets missed entirely with the cognitive process, is because a cognitive process is only a cognitive process, and it's not running through all of the ways in which someone is being. Okay, and so there's so much, not only is there so much trauma physiology showing up in various imbalances in someone's experience and relationship and work and in their life and even in their spirit, but we're also missing the healing elements that are coming with. And so most of the time processing is missed, and so is the integration of. So the integration then is missed too. And a lot of times these things are bypassed, and there's this natural integration that's happening where your somatic self or your self energy is, every time you're processing one element of trauma, the whole system starts to shift around that. And so does your self-concept, who you know yourself to be. And we want to go through that process, and so that you can be with all experience, that you can be with anything in life, so you can fully show up and with tools in order to surf any of the waves that are coming. Because it's not about avoidance, and it's not about showing up with a lot of perfectionism or fight, flight, freeze, and fawn and all of that. No, it's about being whole, and whole does not mean perfect. Whole means you contain multitudes, and it's all okay, and you know how to interrelate to yourself and there for others, and you're showing up in the world in the ways that you're acknowledging your needs, wants, values, boundaries, etc., and your authenticity. You're showing up curious and compassionate, courageous, with persistence and patience and clarity. And it's beautiful. And we've got to keep going. And so I'm going to keep teaching, so that we got to keep going, because if you even have the inclination and intuition of like, you know what, I don't think this is it, you're always right, because there's always a little bit more probably that can be done. And we need to sometimes pump the brakes, because sometimes even in the healing process there can be hypervigilance, like doing all the things, or hypovigilance, not doing enough. And so part of it is a balance too, and sometimes that's stepping back and living life, and sometimes it's engaging, and part of that is just a stance. It's a stance, especially with complex trauma, because it's lifelong, and all of trauma requires maintenance and prevention. And I'm hoping to speak to how we can demystify the healing process and make sure people understand that it doesn't have to be you don't have to be reliving these things and have to remember them and have to be re-traumatized and tortured along the healing process, nor do you need to make a neat story. It will ultimately come when we do the integration. You will know yourself and you will gain the wisdom, and I will guide you into, narrating what that is. And also sometimes just your body's going to come up with the most amazing meaning that is beyond what you can intellectualize. It's often you just know. It's just a knowing that comes on. Your intuition comes back. It's never lost. None of this is ever lost, even if trauma started on day one of your life. None of this is lost. It's covered up. It's covered up, and it's a recon. We're doing a recon process to bring it back. And for those where the trauma has been longer and complex, it can be a building up. It can be a building up. There can be so much fragmentation in a system that we need to maybe turn down the transcendental experiences and come back to formatting an ego. What? You're like, wait a minute, we're supposed to transcend the ego, Shannon. What do you mean? You can transcend the ego when you have a solid sense of self, and then integrate that transcendental experience back into your sense of self and observe the ego and all of that. But that comes from a place where you weren't traumatized originally. When you're traumatized originally, there's a lot of fragmentation, and then you go and try to transcend the ego. Consciousness has a hard time landing back in form. And there can be further fragmentations in the quest to heal. And this happens all the time, and so I'm speaking to that element as well. Because it does happen, that's okay. But just to know that we have to have a solid sense of self before we transcend the self, and to integrate. And transcending the self is not to be in a loosey-goosey, ethereal realm. That's a realm of being, and that's wonderful. Part of that is to bring that shit down here into the earth, okay? To be the conduit between earth and sky. And higher realms of consciousness within your own embodiment. Embodiment is the way. And that has so many, when you're fully embodied, your body is so mystical inside that it can be a beautiful way to walk this earth, and not try to have to transcend the body. You're here now having human experience, and in integrating that creates more expansion for the transcendental to bring it down to earth, to manifest that in your reality. For those that are, interested in consciousness exploration and all of that, the body is such a mistool. It's such a mistool, and there's been so many distortions within the collective as to deny the body, transcend the body, and all of this. And we're here in this lifetime to reclaim our mastery over emotions and embodiment, and to build on that. And so hopefully this video has helped you just understand a little bit more about, we don't have to remember our trauma to heal it, and what healing may look like, and how it can be empowering, and even the need for ego development. If that has been missed, if you have childhood trauma and developmental trauma, some of those developmental milestones might be missed, and that might be playing out in your adult life in a lot of ways, both very apparent and also very unconscious. And sometimes we need to do some of that developmental work that didn't get to happen because there was so much chaos, fight, flight, neglect, abuse, perfectionism, too much stress, poverty, racism, you name it. For those processes to unfold, and perhaps your ancestors weren't able to guide you through that because they weren't able to process through that. And this is why we have such high levels of emotional immaturity on our planet. Even in our leaders, only about 4% of our leaders are emotionally mature. So people creating policy and procedure and laws and leadership and all of it, even healers, right? Like we've got to reclaim some of those developmental pieces and do some of the developmental work. And that's usually what happens in adulthood for people that have unprocessed or unaware childhood trauma. There's coping mechanisms and parts. Something happens in adulthood where the developmental coping skills can't meet the challenge, whether it's a job, work, a move, a child, life, perimenopause, menopause, stress, you name it. A windy day because it could just come out of nowhere. And it trauma shows up in a relationship, so it can be in our relational patterns, and it can be in our physical health symptoms. There's so much research on physical health symptoms, and these trauma is labeled as, if you were to reduce the DSM down to how does trauma epigenetically turn on levers to look like trauma diagnosis, we'd be left with a pamphlet. Some people don't like when I say that. However, it is the truth of the statement, and the same thing goes for physical health conditions as well, because those epigenetic levers get turned on whether in your ancestral trauma or intergenerational trauma, or in your lived experience, and looks like health conditions. And when we start resolving the trauma behind the health condition, the parts that are grasping and holding and trying to get more in their extreme roles to just trying to cope, when we start to integrate and process that, then things can shift. And I'm not saying everything can heal, and not everything is meant to, because that's also the distortion in the collective as to, like, look, in America, health is a privilege because of the high rates of all of the things that are going on, in our food and our water, and in all of this collective trauma and stress and how we work in America. And so don't let your health condition, or what it still looks like even after you process trauma. Part of it is compassion at the end of the day, with whatever you're left with sometimes with complex trauma, and to listen to your window of tolerance, meaning, like, this is a hard no. And nothing is a better teacher of your window of tolerance of a no than a boundary, other than a chronic illness, and even some mental health symptoms as well. So hopefully this video has helped and kind of demystify. That's what I aim to do. If you have comments, questions, that's welcome. Please share. So many people are trying to get access to this information and search for so long to have this, have their intuitions validated. So people are smart. They're really smart, and there's a lot of information available these days. I want to give more accurate information and more nuanced and richer information so that people can really understand themselves, and to demystify the healing process and speak to the empowerment pieces within it without denying the harsh reality of how much trauma sucks. So hopefully this has helped. Thank you so much for watching.